What's going on, guys? Today we're going to be talking about Dear Evan Hansen. Welcome to Victims and Villains. If you guys are new to Victims and Villains, we are a nonprofit and publication that creates content like what you guys are watching right now, simply to educate and engage individuals on mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about Dear Evan Hansen. My name is Captain Nostalgia. I have the pleasure of being both a writer and podcaster here. If you guys like what we stand for, consider subscribing below. Dear Evan Hansen is a Broadway adaptation of a young boy named Evan Hansen, played by Ben Platt, that we'll get to in just a couple of minutes. Hansen suffers from social anxiety and is instructed by his therapist to write letters to himself to basically give himself encouragement. When one of those letters end up in the hands of fellow classmate Connor, who ultimately ends up committing suicide, a plot point which we will talk about in depth in just a few minutes. Evan kind of builds this facade about how the two of them were friends and ultimately kind of ends up leading this strange revolution. Describing the plot of this movie is incredibly complex. The trailer is one of the only trailers I've watched in the last 2 years, and the trailer itself is very long. Thoughts about trailers aside, the movie itself is a little bit messy. First off, the fact that the majority of this film is centered on the fallout of someone taking their own life, it seems problematic that we only spend less than 10 minutes with this character. There seems to be a shift about halfway through the film where it is kind of this exploration piece on how the death of suicide really affects those around us, whether it's family, friends, classmates. And in that regards, this film does do a really good job at exploring the fallout of how a mental health situation can really affect more than just the person it's physically affecting. And I know online there's a lot of people that have issues with how this film handles mental health. I have my own issues with that, and I'll talk about them in just a few minutes. But there are moments and redeeming qualities about this film on how it handles the subject. And again, I will get there, I promise. But once this tonal shift happens, this film kind of turns into this like weird love story, Cinderella-esque, almost kind of a kid trying to fulfill this fantasy. It feels like two visions competed together and kind of came together to be a very disjointed narrative. And then when the fallout of Evan's lies, eventually the third act transforms into, not once again, into a very predictable paint by numbers, the character has to learn his lesson kind of movie. That's what's really frustrating about a movie like Dear Evan Hansen, is that it's predictable, it's unsure of itself, and it's still trying to tackle really tough to talk about topics like suicide, mental health, and depression. And when it comes to talking about these topics, the film has good intentions, but doesn't handle them with the severity and the seriousness that they really need to be addressed with. If you've ever listened to our podcast, yes, we joke and we laugh and we share lots of film trivia when we're talking about movies, but a good portion of our conversations that we're having are pulling out mental health themes to talk about and to really deconstruct them and separate them away from the film to really humanize these elements and make them even more relatable. For Dear Evan Hansen, it feels like they're really prone to talk and address these issues very heavily in the film, and there's a point where these themes, they just kind of fade into the background and everything gets all happy. And from someone that has gone through that and just kind of separating myself as a film critic very briefly, it feels like a slap in the face. I'd work very hard and go through many tough years of depression to actually kind of get to a place where I felt at peace with myself. Dear Evan Hansen basically says, oh, you meet a girl, your dreams, and boom, everything you wanted is going to problem solved. My rant is over now. Performance-wise, Ben Platt obviously carries this movie. He does a really great job. Obviously, he won a Tony for his performance when this was originally on Broadway. And he brings that same energy and that same vulnerability to this character. And the way that we talk about how Hugh Jackman is Wolverine and Robert Downey Jr. is Iron Man, Ben Platt is Evan Hansen. Speaking of characters, when you're talking about secondary and even tertiary characters, sometimes Julianne Moore is probably the best example of this. She plays Hansen's mom in this movie. She just doesn't feel like she fits in at any point in this movie. There's one key character moment for her to kind of progress Evan Hansen's character to the next element where we need him to be in the finale. Outside of that, she's largely present for a large majority of this movie, and there was even a point where the film goes on a long time where you don't see her, and then by the time that we actually see her again, it's like, oh, I forgot she was in this movie. Some of the second act where it kind of becomes a love story, and it kind of becomes this like Cinderella-esque fantasy for Evan. This is the part of the movie where it really seems to lag. And I get that this is a musical, and while I'm not the hugest fan of musicals, and this might be a comment that's showing my bias, the musical numbers can sometimes feel awkward. And I don't mean as in breaking realism awkward. I mean the way that they're structured awkward. It might work on Broadway, but it doesn't quite work in some of the context for this film. Coming back to stand-up performances, though, Caitlyn Dever is another name that is just honestly really incredible. She is the close second for the best performance in this behind Platt. She's vulnerable, charismatic. She has a wide range in with her character throughout this film. Our mental health moment for this movie, and if you guys are new to our content and wondering what mental health moment is, this is a part of the video and or review where we will take out a theme of mental health or something of encouragement to just kind of break the stigma of mental health. There's a scene where Evan Hansen is sitting with fellow classmates Elena. For context, Elena is one of the most popular girls in school. Evan is not quite on that social level. But she confesses that she herself struggles with depression, and it really kind of rocks Evan's world when he hears this. And I think that honestly, this is such a great moment to kind of address that depression is not something that fits into a singular mold. It does not care about your religious status, your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, your gender identity. It doesn't discriminate. It has no bias. Depression is something that can attack anyone. And I just want to encourage anyone that's watching this right now that if you or someone you know is struggling and you're having thoughts of suicide or depression, that you're not alone. We say this in all of our content, but as of this video, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when we look to international numbers, there are 800,000 successful suicides that occur every year. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So I just want to encourage you and remind you that you're not alone. That if that's the depression talking. Depression is a liar, and depression makes it to where you feel like no one understands what you're going through. But the statistics that I just spoke about, they prove that you're not alone. 17 million people have diagnosed depression in the United States. Earlier this video, I myself confessed that I've struggled with depression. I still struggle with depression. you're not alone. Please consider the resources in the descriptions below. And coming back to our movie review, I'm going to go ahead and give Dear Evan Hansen a 3 out of 5. Like I said, there's a lot to really like about this movie. It doesn't always handle its mental health themes the most gracefully, and it's kind of messy in its delivery, but Ben Platt has a good performance. The music is good. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and give this a 3 out of 5. If you guys have seen Dear Evan Hansen, whether it's on Broadway or on the screen, let me know in the comments below what you guys thought. And make sure that you guys hit the subscribe button below. Have a great night.